great opportunity. I feel extremely humbled, yet at the same time nervous also, since I'm doing this for the very first time in your presence. I hope I would not bore you with the hodgepodge presentation, and I'll do my best. Thank you. Okay. What I have tried to do is touch on neuroscience and neuroplasticity as much as I know from my presence and interest in the West, as well as then present the Buddhist equivalent on this subject. What I'll do is I'll try to walk you through the history of neuroscience in a brief way. There has always been this debate about nature and nurture, where we try to figure out what is responsible for our development. On the one hand, there is saying that everything is already given there in the nature. All we have to just do is just wait for it to unfold on its own. Whereas there is this another debate that we need to be working on. There needs to be a lot more input to be put on so that the development could be brought up. So in this regard, neuroscience has also been through this process, in that in the preceding events, there was this era of behaviorism where all it says is there's no need of looking inside what we have, because that doesn't hold any weight. Rather, all that is responsible is what is given there out in the atmosphere, with the environments and whatnot, with our behaviors, everything could be changed. So more or less, there is this outlook of input or stimulus and response, with nothing in between that needs our care. That's one extreme. So this era of behaviorism hit its heyday in 1960s, but then it slowly faded away with the advent of genetic science, where it took us to the other extreme, saying, no, all there is given inside. We are kind of hardwired with things, and no matter how much effort we make, there is hardly anything we can do. It would just express on its own. So that's another extreme. Neuroscience as a discipline, at least from what I heard, Richard Davidson shared this in a NPR radio interview, was that it became as a discipline in mid-70s. And that before then, it wasn't a discipline of its own. And here, it began with what Richard would call the repertoire of human emotions, the so-called classic six. They would come up with just 6 numbers of emotions. That's the most they could come up with that the humans have, of which happiness could be considered a joyful one, surprise maybe a neutral one, all the rest are something disturbing. And from there, they proceeded on to the development. So why I am telling this is that what preceded neuroscience has helped in shaping it, in that, more particularly with the coming up of neuroplasticity, it became even more clearer that not everything is set in stone. Rather, through our own intervention, we could bring up changes, more importantly, changes for our own good. So over the years, we have seen neuroscience not only develop as a discipline, but rather grow into several sub-disciplines within it, such as cognitive, affective, evolutionary, cellular, clinical, social, and so more. And within the affective neuroscience, one may bring in the so-called contemplative neuroscience, of which Richard Davidson and Tanya Singer have been so involved in bringing out the effects of healthy mental states for our social good. Okay. So that brings me to this fact that early on, neuroscience, more or less in the case of so many other disciplines, came or was born out of necessity. Thus, the focus more on distressful states was quite natural. But then, as we moved on, it also became necessary to explore the area of healthy emotions and see if there is something that we could do about it. Have more say in actually looking into the world of healthy emotions, if possible, even plan for what do you call pre-age, what do you call prenatal or not even prenatal or early age attempts, interventions by which we could bring those seeds within them so that they could grow and eventually avert the emergence of unwanted mental disorders. So what I have personally found in my observation on the neuroscience is that what it does is it always looks for correlates. And if we were to just merely stop there, it doesn't really seem to mean much. It only means to bring up what are the correlates. What correlates are there for several mental states, be that disorderly ones or healthy ones, on our brain, on our body, as much. But what is very important is that what is found in the laboratory researches are being then translated into clinical research, into real life incidents. And so that what we might individually experience within could be now replicated and then applied in a larger scale. That too, through repeated investigation, confirmation that yes, this particular way of contemplation is helpful, is actually can be demonstrated to affect healthily, so that with that confirmation that can be now applied. That part is very appealing to me. Otherwise, if we were to just merely look for correlates, I kind of think that, well, one could always look for correlates, then what? Because personally, we feel the benefits within ourselves. But importantly, that personal experience can now be replicated, expanded, made universally available, more particularly with the systems like secular way of presenting the contemplations. So now we come to neuroplasticity. We see lots of people at work on my brain. So neuroplasticity, its discoveries and possibilities. Here again, we have a history to understand, not that it just came out overnight.
You are one of them.
Neuroplasticity, by the way, is the ability for the brain, neurons, and the circuits there, synapses, whatnot. I'm not an expert here, but for them to form new structures and even change in their function, the basic ability. But then, earlier they thought that such plasticity possibility kind of stops sometime early in childhood. And once we reach that stage, and the brain kind of remains static and no changes could be made. So that was the early idea of plasticity. But then later, it was seen that aspects of brain remain plastic even after early childhood goes into adulthood. And then even later, it seems it has been found that it even occurs throughout life. And in a very strange thing, it was even found out that change is the rule, not the exception. I quote Richie Davidson. And changes happen at various levels, at cellular level, at large-scale level, on structures, in functions. So the question here is, what do we want such changes to happen? If it were to be confined to individual development only, then we could as much be content with what we are doing in our own individual cultivation. But once we cultivate them and we can show them on the brain, then it could be studied, confirmed, and then replicated, and then applied widely. So that's how knowing that changes do happen even on biological basis is very helpful, and also making sure that what changes brings what changes where in the brain, so that we can match positive mental thinking with positive changes in the brain. And change can happen through so many ways. It can happen on several levels on the brain, or also on some other nervous system parts within the body, at microcellular level to a large scale observable functional and structural level. But in terms of the medium which brings such changes, it could be behavioral, environmental, experiential, neural processes, contemplative practices, bodily injuries, just about anything that we do, that we engage in through our body, speech, and mind, brings about a change. And from a Buddhist perspective, this is not something new, because everything we do with our mind kind of gets its expression through the body, maybe more so through the brain, but through every aspect of the body. And when it passes through it, it just affects it. It would kind of affect it. So the effects that we find that's the reason why I was saying finding correlates is not so much of a surprise, or not so much of a big deal, but to kind of then bring it forward into play in social benefits is what matters. So that's how people like Richie Davidson, many others in the Mind and Life, and others, more particularly John Kabat-Zinn, Paul Ekman, and others have been doing a wonderful job, including Tanya Singer, have been doing a wonderful job in testing how contemplative practice may be affecting biological effects, maybe producing observable biological effects, so that we could confirm that this particular kind of practice does have a ground, real help, so that it could be then taught to others. So sometimes people may think that, why do they match contemplative practices? Contemplative practices bring benefit. It is something that I personally experience. I feel wonderful when I generate bodhicitta. Try to penetrate into the understanding of selflessness. It kind of unlocks the knots within me. It's very experiential, but the purpose behind matching it with the neurocorrelates and seeing structural functional changes is what I have been saying. That's what we need to really cooperate, collaborate, because that's going to be a thing in the future to be applied and used, made available to much wider. So in this regards, I hear Richie has been doing in his lab a wonderful thing in kind of creating toolbox of preventive benefits that could give rise to beneficial effects. Toolbox that one could carry so that in emergencies, just as we have first aid medicines, we could now have first aid toolbox of contemplative practices that we could go into as soon as we are hit by some kind of a disorder. So that's what they are doing. But then, we have to remember is that through their research, they have found that just a short period of practice is not enough. It has to be consistent, systematic, persistent. Only then we can hope for structural changes to happen, that too, a long-lasting changes, so that the benefits could be experienced, even as you call baseline benefit. Baseline changes can be seen so that the benefits could be seen, endured, even when one is up and going in the world, not necessarily steeped in that practice. So from this, they have found out that happiness is a skill. not a fixed trait one either has or has not throughout the life. This is exactly word by word quoting Ritchie in his interview with Chris Tippett in the program called On Being. I just accidentally happened to listen to that. I was so immersed in it. I listened to it maybe 3 times. I went back 3 times and I studied it. This is where these are coming. So happiness is a skill that we can learn. So that means we go back to neuroplasticity, having known that the neuroplasticity is a fact, not a fiction. But one thing that we need to know after that is that the change should not be just let to happen on its own, but rather we should exert more say in what direction the change should take place. And that way we would have a say in what well-being we want to be in. But neuroplasticity, given the underlying belief of the neuroscientists, the materialists, given their belief in that mind is nothing, consciousness is nothing but an emergent property of the brain, I think they should go much more than merely looking for correlates and doing researches in the labs and then bringing them into translatable researches. Because since they have seen that some contemplative practices that bring about wonderful experience are actually can be matched with happenings there, they could now go there, start there, and try to induce them mechanically. Because theoretically, that should be possible. After all, mind being an emergent property of the brain, if you change brain, the resultant states should necessarily come. I think so. Very well. If that's not the case, there are people who are trying this. Maybe not Ritchie and Tanya Singer and others, but there are others who are trying this. Because for them, the assumption, or maybe the belief that yes, mind, consciousness, is an emergent property of the brain. Wherever there's brain, there's mind. No brain, no mind. I am reminded by Christoph's presentation I was translating, where he says, no brain, never mind. I read it differently. I said, no brain, don't worry, never mind, because there still is consciousness. But obviously, he didn't mean that. He meant that no brain, never think of mind's possibility there. But I read it differently. Don't be afraid. With the underlying belief that mind is nothing, consciousness is nothing but an emergent property of the body, that it comes after the brain, then it should be possible. Once we have found what matches with what good thing matches with which part, we could now start from the brain top down and then bring about the change mechanically. Some people are trying this. Look here. How thorough a change could be, and how far optogenetics have gone. So optogenetics, the tool that people are coming up with, where, by the way, I understood that optogenetics is implanting neurons with light-sensitive proteins called opsins that has been harvested from several creatures that one can stimulate or silence them with a single optic fiber. So one could have the control in terms of what needs to be flashed up, what could be silenced, to the point that people's movement could be controlled, to the point that people could be made to sleep or even made aggressive. These have been found. Now, how far can we go? This way of approach is very sincere to the assumption that yes, mind is nothing but emergent property. But how far they can go? Because under this assumption, there is the possibility of mechanically inducing bodhicitta. You just change and go, bodhicitta. Whereas we have found bodhicitta is so difficult to come up with. We try again and again and again with contrived way of developing it. Eventually, we kind of get a glimpse, so to say, of a pure bodhicitta, but then it kind of fades away. But then from this, it seems like it could be possible. So there is a person by the name of Ed Boyden. In 2005, he even developed this optogenetics, and he has now developed what is called autopatcher. He has robots to do this work, not human beings to be engaged in, who need breaks.
Can brain be fully solved?
So by can brain be fully solved, there is actually a person by the name of Ed Boyden who is actively involved in, he really pursues this, actively involved in developing mechanical tools that could do this work of figuring out the neurons which are associated with which. They even can kind of create a hole through micromillimeter width tip of a what do you call optic glass pip. Yeah, optic glass fiber, and then what do you call suck through it, can create a hole there, can let light into it so that it could be detected and also seen where the connections go, which is connected with which, so that they could have more control. Now later, they could even silence it if they don't want, or they could increase it. So he is seriously pursuing that brain needs to be solved, and the way to go about the contemporary way to go about that of doing PhDs, everyone, is not the way, but rather all should be working together with him so that the work that he's doing could be multiplicated and the process could be expedited so that within 50 years, everything could be solved. That's what he is pursuing. But whether we can get there or not. So what would that mean, given the underlying assumption? Given the underlying assumption, that would mean no need to practice. All contemplatives could come in pills. All contemplatives could come in some kind of prescriptions. Okay, do this, this, this. But then, the question, if that were the case, how would we face such situations? This is an encephalia. It is called it is a congenital disorder where a person has either part of the brain absent or whole of the brain absent. And I have a wonderful case here. This actually is Nicholas Koch. He was born in Pueblo, Colorado. He can't see, he can't hear, he can't suck, he doesn't crawl, he doesn't sit up. And usually in such cases, people survive for few hours and then they die. In his case, he survived for 1 week, 1 month, a whole year. He had a birthday party. And after that, I think he didn't make it to the second birthday anniversary. But he did survive. And he survived without the help of any doctors, without the help of any tubes. And all he had by way of brain parts is just the brain stem, nothing. So, and yes, eventually he even smiled, he even laughed, he showed emotions there, which are signs of consciousness. But where would that have come from if with no brain? Now you would have to look into some brain stems and say, yes, maybe consciousness is somewhere out there. So that's one case. There's another case called hydrocephalus. There's another case called hydrocephalus, which means water on the brain, where instead of the usual brain parts, the parts are filled with fluid. They are called the cerebrospinal fluid, and they take up because the movement for that is obstructed and it kind of fills up, and that enlarges the head to the point that sometimes there would be the need of taking it out. But what it does is it takes away the space for the usual brain parts, and thus people hardly have the usual brain parts that are associated with different emotions and cognitions, whatnot. By a person. a person by the name of John Lober has done a very systematic research in this and has come up with the data where he has shown that people with this kind of a condition range from nearly full brain to 95% no brain. And in the case of those people who have 95% of the brain lacking with the water taking their place, they have found half of them were doing normally. Not quite full normally, but quite well, including someone who had 100 IQ rating. There was another person in England whose condition was noticed by a colleague of him when he saw his head enlarging. Though he didn't complain of anything abnormal, his head was so unusually large. So some friend of his kind of intimated it to the doctor, and when they met up to kind of do some research, they found out that his was a hydrocephalus case. His might be some 75% without brain, yet he was doing normally, more normally than others in the field of mathematics. And in terms of the IQ, he scored 125. So people would ask him, people would ask the researcher, how come? Maybe there is a wrong, there is a mistake in the interpretation of the reading. So he has this to say, I can't say whether the mathematics student has a brain weighing 50 grams or 150 grams, but it is clear that it is nowhere near the normal 1.5 kilogram. But one thing we have to know, and this has been very frequently reiterated in the course of this conference by Richie and others, that so far we may say that it is an emergent property of the brain, but in terms of how does this subjective quality of consciousness come, it is still unaccounted for. Just to quote Richie himself, he says, mind just pops up where there is brain. Do you remember having said that? Yeah, I have it. You said that. You have said that. I have the record of it. He says that the brain just pops up where there's brain. Mind just pops up. But in terms of how, still a question. There is a doctor by the name of Sam Parnia who is doing a wonderful research on consciousness, allowing the possibility that maybe brain could survive, mind could survive brain because of so many cases of out-of-body experiences, including that of near-death experiences and also out-of-body experiences, because many of them so-called near-death experiences could qualify for out-of-body experiences, including the experience of Dr. Eben Alexander, who himself was a hard-nosed neuroscientist, skeptic, and explaining all these phenomena in one way or the other. But eventually, when he himself suffered coma and remained in that for several hours, he came out a totally different person. He is now a very ardent advocate that, yes, life is not just this. There's more to it. So from a Buddhist point of view, how does neuroplasticity tie in? You see a knot here. This is just a representation of mind-body entanglement. Mind-body entanglement. So long, and this is mind-body entanglement in a gross form. If I were to really represent the entire course of life, I would have come up with a broad, section here, and a very tiny, yet with the two combination. And two combination with the subtle mind and the subtle wind, yet again growing into bigger one, and then bigger, like that. So there is no disruptions as such in the stream, in the continuity of the consciousness, as well as in the continuity of something material, energetic substance, matter. Yet, in terms of the gross physicality and the gross conceptual thought that we are aware of, that could come and go, but not necessarily, as you might call the mental substrates and rough physical substrates. They do not necessarily stop from a Buddhist perspective. So from a Buddhist perspective, mind in one level or the other never stops. Doesn't necessarily have to be conscious in the way that we understand. So from a Buddhist perspective, we say, for the time being, when we find our mind locked up in this body, in this gross body, the force that brings it together is the karma. So long as the karma vision remains, we could be locked. Whenever the karma vision ends, for that particular togetherness, then they part. So while together,
on the grosser level,
on the grosser
subtle level, never separate.
Never stop.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. That's exactly what I meant. But so if I were to represent it on the thread, that's how I would have done it. That the continuity would never have stopped. Yet, in terms of the thickness, it would have changed. So, from a Buddhist perspective, so long as they are together, they are mutually dependent in terms of their continuum. That the previous instance of the brain of body helps in the subsequent, helps in the continuity of the subsequent subsequent instant of the body. Likewise, but what is different is, just as here, so they support each other as cooperative conditions for the other. So the body serves as a cooperative condition for the mind. Mind serves as the cooperative condition for the brain. And that remains, that relationship remains so long as the karmic vision remains for that gross level mind and body togetherness. But just as in the picture here, you see that the black strand kind of keeps keeping its blackness all through, and the white keeps keeping its whiteness all throughout. Likewise, in terms of the substantial cause, matter stays for matter, consciousness stays for consciousness. Never do they interchange. But interestingly, in the epistemology text, where there is this discussion about the relationship between body and mind, it explains that in terms of bodily things affecting the mind, such as through drug, alcohol, certain intake of something, etc., you do see change in the mental level. But in terms of explaining it, it says that it affects the sensory consciousness. Through the sensory consciousness, which becomes kind of a content of the mental consciousness, only then the mental consciousness is affected. It's never a body directly affecting the mind, but it is always mediated through a sensory consciousness. And then through that, it affects. It does affect, but not directly. So in that same epistemology text, it states very clearly, yes, fluctuations affected on the brain, on the mind does happen, and that happens because of the sensory fields having been observed by the sensory consciousness, and they eventually affecting the mind. So does the mind affect the body? We already know that. Yeah, it is interesting. I found some references in some Buddhist texts. I cannot actually say whether they are actual Indian works or not. But there are some Buddhist. I did check this in the Kanju Tenju collection. I could not find it. There are certain texts where there is a reference of 8 essences, where they say the essence of the eyes is the tears, the essence of the tongue is the saliva, the essence of the body hair is the perspiration, the essence of the nerves is tendon, the essence of the flesh is fat, the essence of the bone is bone marrow. And can you guess what is the essence of the mind? The brain. So it is the essence of the mind. Not mind is the essence of the brain, but brain is the essence of the mind. Do you see the change there? But still, the connection between brain and mind is very well made there. But in terms of what it means, we still have to explore it. So also I found 2-3 references in... So I have 2-3 references referring to the same thing in terms of its being essence. Which one?
What year was the text?
The text is fairly a new text that has been brought out in Tibet, published by the library. It's actually, you might have this in the collection here. If not, you can have that from the library. They have published it recently on brain neuroscience, brain-related things, where towards the end of the book, they have done some exploration of what references could be found in the Buddhist text. Oh yeah, in that you have to look. We don't care about the centuries. We take for granted that we took, pardon? Yeah, that part too is not that clear. It may be, it does refer to the text itself as Yu, a tantric text. Apparently it is a tantric text. All 3 references I have are tantric texts. I did look up in the Kanjur and Tenjur, not Tenjur, I think Kanjur collection. I will deal with that later on, yeah. Yes, I will.
Yeah, let's give Yeshidamdul, please continue.
Okay, yes, sorry. Yeah, so, but you also know, and yesterday His Holiness also brought up how brain is referred to have some connection with generating joy, generating experience of bliss and whatnot. Likewise, in the tantric practice, we do have physiological parts being employed through energy nerves, energy chakras, etc., into the path. So that's exactly a way of mind impacting the body parts, that eventually giving rise to actual experiences. So in terms of the connection, there is no question, but in terms of the order of how they come.
So His Holiness was saying that he could envision causality going both ways. In some contexts, there could be mental processes which could be seen as, purely caused from the brain basis. But in some cases, one could imagine at a much subtler level, just purely mental processes which can then begin to impact the brain.
Now, in terms of
So middle.
So once again, it's the middle way.
So in terms of the nature of consciousness, the position of mind and mental factors, you may have noticed that in the mind and mental factor, I have put an inverted single comma. There is a reason there. Here I'm staying with how people have been using these terms, but I see a problem with this in creating confusion, particularly when this is juxtaposed with the Western understanding. I think so. So that's the reason. Please bear this in mind. So just as this picture here shows, mind is not a unified, monolithic, continuous thing, but rather a discontinuous thing constituted of subsequent events or subsequent instances, as is reflected here. But in terms of its continuity, although it may vary in terms of grossness or subtleness, but it kind of keeps on. Never is there a break. But the important thing is that the reason for making transformation, making efforts, practices is so that this continuity not only stays put, but also stays put in a much more purer, elevated, exalted state, for which it always has the capacity, potential for. So it is non-material, it is luminous and knowing in nature, in that it is not just a mirroring of the images, but rather it engages actively in knowing and in engaging with it. The third one, I make a distinction here. Every event at a given time is composed of so-called mind and mental factors. Although whenever we take out particular stand of consciousness, be that mindfulness, memory, sleep, thoughtfulness, attention, whatever, each could be considered consciousness. But in terms of a mental event, they do not constitute a complete mental event. For a mental event at any given time, it has to be constituted of the so-called mind, which I would call basic awareness factor, and the secondary awareness factor. And in terms of the mental factors, there are certain numbers which are necessarily present, and depending on the complexity of the mental event, the number of the mental factors, either you could call activated or present within that collection, could vary. Okay.
Consciousness.
All consciousness can be categorized either as sensorial and mental. Here I make a distinction between sensorial and mental. I do not consider, I don't think you do also, I sense consciousness as mental. You do? Don't you? Do you in the half and half? No, but would that be considered? Would that be considered mental?
In the moment where you have a concept of wetness, we consider perception going into mental.
Into mental.
Because you have a conception on a wavelength which you call wet.
Okay. When you say conception, then that's different. That's already moved into the thought.
But what is then
But
pure
it's more
perception?
problematic though, because
Yeah.
even sensory processes are mental processes.
Yeah,
from-
preconceptual, it's mental. Preconceptual.
Yeah.
Just the qualia of red itself is a
It's
mental event.
Mental event.
So in that case, please follow me here in that I do not consider I sense consciousness as mental. Because if we consider I sense consciousness as mental, then we would have to also institute mind within I sense consciousness. That would be problematic. There is no mind in the I sense consciousness. Is there? You wouldn't say that there is mind.
There is.
Okay.
From a
Yes.
Western
So
psychological conception.
because of that, I make this distinction here between sensorial and mental, and that all sensory consciousnesses are cognitive in nature, not emotional. We do not have a compassionate I sense consciousness. And all emotions, and I mean, this is being presented from the Buddhist perspective. So all emotions and conceptual thoughts are mental events. Sensory consciousness cannot be cultivated through meditation, whereas mental consciousness can be. And there is a sharp separation between ordinary perception and conception. As well as there is a sharp separation between ordinary conception and cultivated perception. By this, I want to allude to the fact that, yes, though we may begin with a conceptual thought of an understanding of emptiness, but when we familiarize with it, it could be developed into a perceptual consciousness. That would be something totally unexperienced by ordinary people. So for that, one has to look for a yogi and then undertake a practice. So generally, we see a sense of improvement and refinement in terms of the position of mind, its constituents, its function, etc., as we go up the philosophical scales. Likewise, we see a similar sense of improvement and refinement between Sutra and Tantra. And as it is very apparent, the subtlest mind and related practice appear only in Tantra, within Tantra, in the highest Yoga Tantra only.